A journey through the eternal city. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let your mind drift back through the mists of time to a place where history and legend intertwine, where marble columns rose to meet the sky, and where the heartbeat of a vast empire once echoed through stone-paved streets. This is Rome, the eternal city, a place that began as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River, nurtured by fertile land and shaped by stories of gods, kings, and warriors. From these humble origins, Rome would rise to dominate the known world, building an empire whose roads stretched across continents and whose culture would endure for millennia. But this journey is not only about power and conquest. It is about people, the farmers, soldiers, poets, artisans, mothers, and philosophers who made Rome not just a city, but a civilization. As you listen, allow the gentle cadence of this story to guide you through the rise of the Republic, the glory of the empire, and its eventual decline. Let the echoes of ancient voices, soft and timeless, accompany you into a state of calm reflection. Whether you seek to learn, to remember, or simply to drift into restful sleep, this journey through Rome invites you to pause, to breathe, and to wander peacefully through the corridors of the past. The land of Rome, where it all began. In the soft golden light of an Italian sunset, imagine standing atop one of the 7 hills that cradle the city of Rome. Before you stretches a landscape both gentle and resilient, rolling fields, cypress trees swaying in the warm breeze, the glimmering ribbon of the Tiber River winding its way toward the sea. This land, fertile, rich, yet modest, would nurture the beginnings of a civilization that would one day shape the course of history. Long before marble temples rose and legions marched, this land was home to humble peoples, shepherds, farmers, and small village communities who tended olive groves and wheat fields under the Mediterranean sun. It is here, in this cradle of gentle hills and valleys, that the story of Rome quietly begins. The geography of Italy played an essential role. The Italian peninsula, shaped like a boot, jutting into the heart of the Mediterranean, was ideally positioned for trade and expansion. To the north, the formidable Alps formed a natural barrier, protecting its early inhabitants from many northern invasions. To the west, the Tyrrhenian Sea offered access to distant lands and maritime cultures. The central spine of the Apennine Mountains divided the land but also offered rich pastures and woods. At the heart of this landscape lay the Tiber River, flowing gently but steadily, a lifeline for early settlements. Near its banks, a cluster of small hills would become the site of Rome. These hills, the Palatine, Capitoline, Aventine, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian, offered natural fortification, a place from which the early people could observe the vast plains around them and protect themselves from threats. The land itself encouraged agriculture. Its volcanic soil was rich and fertile, perfect for the cultivation of wheat, grapes, and olives, staples that would nourish generations. Here, communities tilled the earth, raised livestock, and wove their traditions deeply into the rhythms of nature. But this was no isolated land. Early Italy was a mosaic of peoples and cultures. The Latins, the tribe from whom the Romans would descend, shared these lands with others. The Etruscans to the north, a sophisticated and mysterious people skilled in engineering and art. The Sabines in the hill country to the east, and the Greek colonists who established prosperous cities in southern Italy and Sicily. These neighbors influenced and enriched what would become Roman culture. The Romans would borrow from the Etruscans their architectural techniques, the arch, the vault, and aspects of religious practice. From the Greeks, they would inherit myths, gods, and artistic ideals that would blend into a uniquely Roman character. Yet, in these early centuries, the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, Rome was still just one village among many. Simple huts with thatched roofs dotted the landscape, clustered together for protection and companionship. Life revolved around the seasons, planting in spring, harvest in summer and autumn, tending herds in winter. It was a life close to the earth, yet one marked by growing complexity. Tribal chieftains began to emerge, local kings ruled small territories, and communities constructed rudimentary temples and sacred spaces to honor their gods. Amid these beginnings, a legend would take root, a story that Romans told themselves to explain their origins. They spoke of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers abandoned as infants, rescued and suckled by a she-wolf under the shade of a fig tree. Raised by a shepherd, they grew strong and courageous, destined for greatness. In adulthood, they quarreled over where to found their city. In a fateful moment, Romulus slew his brother and became the first king of Rome, marking the city's birth on April 21st, 753 BCE. Though mythical, this tale reflected the values Romans cherished: strength, endurance, destiny, and a willingness to act decisively even at great personal cost. It gave the Roman people a sense of identity and purpose, that theirs was no ordinary city, but one founded under the auspices of fate itself. But beyond legend, archaeology confirms that a real settlement did rise on the Palatine Hill around this time. Modest at first, just huts and simple enclosures, but well-positioned for growth. The Palatine overlooked the Forum Romanum, the marshy valley between hills that would become the civic and commercial heart of Rome. This early community prospered because of its location, close to the salt roads that connected inland Italy to coastal trade routes, near fords of the Tiber that allowed merchants and travelers to cross easily. Trade flourished. Salt, grain, pottery, livestock, exchanged not only with neighboring Italic tribes, but with Etruscans and Greeks as well. Slowly, Rome transformed from a village into a town, its people laying stones, building walls, draining marshes, and crafting a society grounded in both tradition and innovation. In these early centuries, the seeds of Roman resilience, adaptability, pragmatism, determination began to take root. Life remained simple for most. Farmers rose with the sun, tended their crops, honored their household gods, and shared the fruits of their labor at communal festivals. The scent of baking bread mingled with the earthy aroma of olive oil and wine, while in the evening, families gathered around hearths to share stories passed down from elders. The land was not just a backdrop, it was a character in Rome's story. The hills offered protection, the river provided sustenance, and the rich soil nurtured both crops and dreams. The Romans saw their environment as a gift from the gods, but also as something to master, to cultivate, and to honor. In this gentle beginning of fields and farms, myths and men, lay the promise of something far greater. No one tending the vineyards or herding sheep in these quiet hills could have foreseen that their modest village would one day command legions that marched across 3 continents, or build roads and aqueducts that would endure millennia. But from this land, this fertile, sun-drenched, rugged land, Rome was born. So as night falls softly over this ancient landscape, and the sounds of day give way to evening songbirds and rustling leaves, we can almost hear the faint echoes of those first Romans, farmers, shepherds, craftsmen, whose quiet lives would one day be woven into the grand tapestry of empire. Their world was humble, yet their legacy would be monumental. Legends and Kings, the founding of Rome. As the early mists rise from the Tiber's gentle waters, we turn to Rome's beginnings, not just in geography, but in legend and leadership. Rome's story is one where history and myth entwine, where kings and tales shape the soul of a people destined for greatness. In Roman tradition, after the mythical founding by Romulus, in 753 BCE, the young city was ruled by a series of 7 kings. These monarchs, some more legendary than historical, guided Rome through its first centuries, laying foundations both literal and symbolic for what would follow. Romulus himself became Rome's first king. His reign established the earliest institutions: Rome's sacred boundaries, its civic structure, and its military ethos. He welcomed outcasts and exiles, offering them refuge and citizenship, a reflection of Rome's pragmatic and inclusive beginnings. But Romulus's most enduring legacy lay in Rome's relationship with its neighbors. The story of the rape of the Sabine women, where Romulus's men, lacking wives, abducted women from a neighboring tribe during a festival, reveals both the brutal pragmatism and the forging of alliances that would characterize Roman policy for centuries. While shocking to modern sensibilities, this legend symbolized unity through conflict, as the Sabines and Romans eventually reconciled and merged their communities. After Romulus, the crown passed to Numa Pompilius, a figure revered for his wisdom and piety. Under his gentle reign, Rome's institutions of religion took form: the priesthoods, temples, and sacred rituals that would bind Roman society together for generations. Numa was said to have established the cult of Vesta, the Vestal Virgins, guardians of Rome's sacred flame, a symbol of the city's eternal life. Numa's peaceful rule contrasted with Rome's martial origins. Where Romulus wielded the sword, Numa shaped the soul. He wove spirituality into civic life, ensuring that Rome's identity was as much religious as military. The third king, Tullus Hostilius, returned Rome to warlike ways, leading campaigns against neighboring cities, expanding Roman influence and territory. The fourth king, Ancus Marcius, blended peace and war, founding Ostia, Rome's port city, connecting Rome more closely to the sea and maritime trade. As Rome grew, its kings became more ambitious. Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king, is remembered for grand projects. He began the construction of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer that drained the marshlands between the hills, transforming the Forum from a swamp into the civic heart of the city. Under these kings, Rome evolved from a simple village into a bustling town. Its wooden huts gave way to stone buildings. Streets were laid out. Temples crowned the hills. Rome's Forum became a center of trade and debate. Its walls rose higher, enclosing not just homes, but hopes for the future. The sixth king, Servius Tullius, further reformed the city, instituting the census, classifying citizens based on wealth and landholding, a practice that would endure throughout Roman history. His reforms shaped Rome's social structure, delineating classes, rights, and responsibilities, anchoring the Roman concept of citizenship. But the monarchy's final chapter would end in darkness. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, Rome's seventh and last king, embodied tyranny. Arrogant and ruthless, he ruled without respect for the Senate or the people. His reign culminated in a crime that would end the monarchy itself: the assault of Lucretia, a noblewoman whose honor and subsequent suicide stirred the Roman people to rebellion. In 509 BCE, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the citizens rose against Tarquin. The monarchy was overthrown, and in its place arose a new order, the Roman Republic. From that moment, Romans swore that no king would ever rule them again. Even centuries later, when emperors held power far exceeding that of any king, they avoided the title Rex, for it had become a symbol of tyranny. This transition from monarchy to republic was not merely a change in government. It reflected Rome's emerging identity, a people who cherished shared governance, balance of power, and civic participation. The monarchy, though long gone, left indelible marks. Rome's religious rites, urban foundations, and early laws all traced back to these legendary kings. Yet for the Romans, history was not merely a list of events. It was a series of lessons. The stories of their kings taught them about virtue and vice, piety and pride, duty and excess. Romulus's strength, Numa's wisdom, Tarquin's arrogance, all became archetypes in Roman cultural memory. As twilight softens the contours of Rome's ancient stones, we can imagine the voices of these early kings lingering in the winds that sweep across the Forum and over the Capitoline Hill. Their reigns, wrapped in legend yet rooted in truth, provided the scaffolding upon which the Republic would rise. The Rome they left behind was no longer a humble village. It had become a city-state with temples, markets, fortifications, and a proud people whose destiny had only just begun. In these kings' footsteps would follow generations of senators, generals, and citizens, each shaping Rome's path forward. But it all began here, with kings whose stories intertwined history and myth, war and peace, ambition and faith. As we close this chapter, let the soft echoes of their reigns linger, gentle reminders that Rome's strength was forged not in ease, but in struggle, and that from legend and monarchy would emerge one of history's most extraordinary republics. The Roman Republic and the spirit of citizenship. The last king had fallen, and with his fall, the Romans vowed never again to submit to a single man's rule. In 509 BCE, a new order was born, the Roman Republic, a government not of kings, but of laws and citizens. This chapter of Rome's history would stretch for nearly 5 centuries, shaping ideals of governance, citizenship, and civic duty that continue to inspire the world today. As the first rays of morning light touch the stones of the Roman Forum, we can imagine senators gathering, their white togas bright in the soft glow, voices rising in debate and decision-making. The Republic was designed not simply as a reaction to tyranny, but as an embodiment of balance and cooperation. At its heart was the principle of shared power. No longer would one man hold all authority. Instead, 2 consuls, elected annually, served as the Republic's highest officials. These consuls commanded the armies, presided over the Senate and assemblies, and enforced laws. But crucially, each consul held a veto over the other, ensuring that decisions were tempered by dialogue, consensus, and restraint. The Senate itself, an assembly of Rome's elders and statesmen, became the most enduring institution. It advised the consuls, controlled finances, and represented Rome's collective wisdom. Though dominated at first by patrician families, the aristocracy, it served as a repository of tradition and experience. Yet, the Republic was never free of tension. Beneath its orderly facade lay a struggle between 2 great classes: the patricians, noble families, who claimed descent from Rome's founders and monopolized political power, and the plebeians, the common citizens, farmers, artisans, merchants, who bore the burden of labor, taxes, and military service, but had little voice in governance. This tension gave rise to the conflict of the orders, a centuries-long negotiation between privilege and equality. The plebeians, through organized protests and secessions, gradually won important rights: the establishment of the tribune of the plebs, officials who could veto unjust laws, the publication of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of laws, and eventually, the right to hold the highest offices of state. These reforms transformed the Republic from an aristocracy into a more inclusive, if imperfect, system. They reflected a uniquely Roman quality, a respect for tradition combined with a willingness to adapt. Change came slowly, but it came always through negotiation, compromise, and a shared commitment to Rome's greater good. At its best, the Republic fostered a profound sense of civic duty. Every Roman citizen, whether rich or poor, shared a common identity and responsibility. They served in the army, voted in the assemblies, and took part in festivals and ceremonies that honored Rome's gods and ancestors. To be Roman was not just a matter of birth, but of participation, an active engagement with the city's life and destiny. Even freed slaves could become citizens, and citizenship itself became a cherished status, a badge of belonging to a community governed by laws rather than the whims of rulers. Daily life reflected this spirit of shared citizenship. The Forum Romanum bustled with merchants, politicians, and ordinary citizens exchanging news, goods, and ideas. Public spaces like the basilicas and temples welcomed all. Religious rites, games, and festivals were communal, blending sacred and civic life in a uniquely Roman fashion. Underlying it all was a respect for mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. Romans believed that their strength came from adhering to time-tested traditions, honoring family, gods, and state above self-interest, practicing moderation and discipline, and placing public service above personal ambition. But the Republic was also a martial society. Every able-bodied male citizen could be called to serve in the army. Military service was not just an obligation, it was a source of pride and honor. Veterans returned not only with the spoils of war, but with stories that enriched Rome's collective memory. During times of crisis, the Republic showed remarkable flexibility. When swift action was needed, the Senate could appoint a dictator. An extraordinary magistrate granted near absolute power for a strictly limited period, typically 6 months. This office was designed not to subvert the Republic, but to protect it. It symbolized trust, that even in moments of great danger, Rome's citizens valued the return to normal governance once the crisis passed. Rome's institutions, consuls, senate, assemblies, tribunes, interlocked like gears in a well-crafted machine. While imperfect and often messy, this system allowed Rome to grow, absorb new peoples, and project power far beyond its humble beginnings. Through it all, the ideal Roman citizen was defined by their devotion to virtues, virtue, pietas, duty, gravitas, seriousness, and fides, faithfulness. These values permeated both public and private life, shaping the character of a people who would soon dominate the Mediterranean world. By the 4th century BCE, Rome's republic had matured into a dynamic and resilient polity. Its blend of tradition and innovation, aristocracy and popular participation, allowed it to thrive even as it faced external threats and internal challenges. It was during this period that Rome faced its first great crisis, the sack of the city by the Gauls in 390 BCE. The invaders breached Rome's defenses and plundered the city, a shock that seared itself into the Roman psyche. But from this humiliation came renewal. Rome rebuilt stronger walls, reformed its army, and vowed never again to suffer such a defeat. This spirit of resilience, born of hardship, forged in the fires of conflict, became a defining feature of the Republic. The Romans learned from each challenge, adapting their institutions, refining their laws, and strengthening their community. As evening descends over the city's temples and streets, we can picture the early citizens of Rome gathering in their homes and taverns, discussing politics and debating the future of their republic. Their world was one of shared sacrifice and shared destiny, a fragile but remarkable experiment in collective governance. And so, the republic endured, evolving, expanding, and asserting itself as the heart of an ever-growing world. In this chapter of Rome's history, we see the seeds of ideas that would echo for millennia: citizenship as a privilege and responsibility, the rule of law, checks and balances on power, and a belief that governance belongs to the people. The Roman Republic was not perfect, but it was extraordinary. It laid the foundations not only for Rome's own empire, but for political ideals that continue to inspire us today. The Roman military, discipline and power. As dusk settles over the hills of Rome, casting a warm golden glow across its ancient stones, we turn our gaze to the heart of what made Rome not just a city, but a power unlike any the world had seen before: its military. For Rome's strength was forged not only in the Senate or the Forum, but on the dusty roads where legionaries marched, on battlefields far from home, and in the discipline that bound soldier to state. In the earliest days of the Republic, Rome's army was little more than a citizen militia, farmers who set aside plows to take up swords when duty called. Every male citizen who owned land was expected to serve when needed. Their weapons were simple, their training basic, and their battles close to home. But Rome's ambitions grew, and with them, so did its military needs. As Rome confronted enemies farther afield, Etruscans, Samnites, and eventually the formidable Carthaginians, its armies evolved from a part-time force to a professional instrument of conquest. At the core of this transformation was a relentless focus on discipline. The Roman soldier, or legionary, became renowned not only for bravery, but for obedience, endurance, and adaptability. The phrase disciplina militaris came to define an entire way of life. The Roman military was organized into legions, each consisting of thousands of soldiers, meticulously divided into smaller units that could maneuver independently or together in perfect coordination. Within a legion, centurions commanded centuries, units nominally of 100 men, but often numbering around 80. These centurions were hardened veterans who embodied Roman discipline, enforcing order and setting the example for their men. The Roman soldier's appearance reflected this discipline. He wore armor designed not for show, but for protection and efficiency. The lorica segmentata, with its overlapping iron plates, allowed freedom of movement while shielding the torso. His helmet, crested and reinforced, protected head and neck. His shield, the iconic scutum, was large and curved, offering both individual defense and, when locked together with others, a near impenetrable wall. But it was the gladius, the short sword, that symbolized Rome's military philosophy: close combat, relentless attack, and brutal efficiency. Roman soldiers were trained to fight not with long, sweeping strokes, but with quick, stabbing thrusts, using discipline and formation to overcome often larger or wilder foes. As Rome expanded, its military became not only a tool of conquest, but also a symbol of Roman order. Roads, viae militares, were built first and foremost to allow legions to march swiftly across Italy and beyond. These roads stitched together an empire, making communication and logistics possible at a scale previously unimaginable. A Roman army on the march was itself a marvel of organization. Each evening, wherever they stopped, soldiers constructed a fortified camp, castra, complete with defensive walls, gates, streets laid out in a grid, and designated places for command, storage, and assembly. Even in the wilderness, the Roman army carried Rome itself with it, a miniature, orderly city, ready to fight or move at a moment's notice. The Roman military system also evolved to include auxiliary forces, troops drawn from non-Roman peoples who served alongside legionaries, bringing unique skills, such as archery from Crete, cavalry from Gaul, and slingers from the Balearic Islands. Yet, for all its sophistication, the army remained rooted in duty and shared sacrifice. Soldiers served for years, often decades. Upon retirement, many were rewarded with land grants, often in the very provinces they had conquered, helping to Romanize distant lands and secure the frontiers. The military was not merely an instrument of conquest. It was also a builder of empire. Soldiers constructed bridges, roads, aqueducts, and fortifications. In their hands, the spade was as important as the sword. One of the most significant reforms in Roman military history came in the late 2nd century BCE under Gaius Marius. His reforms professionalized the army, opening service to the landless poor and equipping them at state expense. This change transformed the Roman military from a militia of property owners into a standing army loyal not just to the state, but often to their commanders, a shift that would have profound consequences in the years to come. As Rome's borders expanded beyond Italy to Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, and the Near East, the legions became the guardians of the empire's vast frontiers. Fortresses rose along the Rhine, the Danube, and the deserts of Syria, each a testament to Rome's commitment to order and control. But the discipline that defined Rome's armies also came with harshness. Punishments for desertion, cowardice, or insubordination were severe, sometimes collective. The dreaded punishment of decimation required 1/10 of a disgraced unit to be executed by their own comrades, ensuring that fear and loyalty went hand in hand. Even the symbols of the army reflected its spirit. The aquila, or eagle standard, carried at the head of every legion, embodied the soul of the unit. To lose the eagle was a disgrace worse than defeat itself. Soldiers swore oaths, not just to Rome, but to the eagle, the embodiment of their shared honor. In quiet moments between campaigns, the army maintained its readiness through drills, training, and construction. Campfires glowed across frontiers far from Rome, legionaries sharing stories of distant lands, awaiting the next summons to march. As we picture those camps under starlit skies, it's easy to see why the Roman military was both feared and respected. It was not simply an army, it was Rome itself, carried wherever the eagle flew. By the 1st century BCE, the legions had become more than defenders of the Republic. They were instruments of politics. Generals like Julius Caesar would command legions whose loyalty to their leader rivaled their loyalty to the state itself, setting the stage for civil wars and the eventual rise of empire. But even then, the core identity of the Roman soldier remained: disciplined, resilient, proud. They were the embodiment of Roman values: virtues, disciplina, fides, virtue, discipline, and faithfulness. As night deepens and the glow of ancient campfires flickers in memory, we can reflect on the legacy of the Roman military, a force that shaped not only the empire's borders, but also its character. Their discipline and power built a world that endured for centuries, and their spirit continues to echo in military traditions around the world today. Daily life and the rights of Roman citizens. As the first light of dawn bathed the rooftops of Rome in a soft golden hue, the eternal city stirred to life. Merchants opened their stalls, bakers filled the air with the warm aroma of fresh bread, and citizens in tunics and togas made their way to the bustling Forum Romanum. It was in these quiet rhythms of daily life that the spirit of Roman civilization thrived, a balance of duty, family, tradition, and privilege. The heart of Roman society was the family, or familia, an institution both personal and political. The head of the household, the paterfamilias, held legal authority over all members of his family, from his wife and children to servants and slaves. His role was not simply patriarchal, but symbolic of the larger Roman values of order, hierarchy, and responsibility. Within the walls of a Roman domus, generations often lived together, elders passing down wisdom and tradition to the young. Women in Rome occupied a complex position. While they could not vote or hold public office, they managed households, raised children, and wielded quiet influence within families. Elite Roman women often received an education in literature and philosophy, and might participate in religious life, overseeing household shrines or serving as Vestal virgins, guardians of Rome's sacred flame. Children learned early the expectations of Roman life. Boys trained in rhetoric, history, and martial skills, preparing for future service as soldiers or statesmen. Girls were taught domestic arts, but also imbued with values of modesty and duty. At the core of Roman identity was citizenship, a privilege not granted lightly. To be a Roman citizen was to belong to a unique political and cultural community. Citizenship carried both rights and responsibilities. The right to vote, to marry legally under Roman law, to own property, and to appeal in court, but also the duty to serve in the military and pay taxes. These rights set citizens apart from the vast numbers of non-citizens, slaves, foreigners, and provincials, who lived under Roman rule but lacked the full protection of Roman law. Yet over time, citizenship evolved. Rome's expansion brought diverse peoples into its orbit, and gradually, these conquered subjects were offered pathways to citizenship, helping to bind the empire together. A freed slave, if formally manumitted, could become a Roman citizen, though their rights were limited. Their children, however, would enjoy full citizenship. This inclusiveness, tempered by hierarchy, was one of the keys to Rome's endurance. In daily life, Roman citizens engaged in activities that reflected their social standing. The wealthy elite lived in spacious townhouses adorned with intricate mosaics and frescoes, their atriums open to sunlight, their gardens lush and fragrant. They dined lavishly, reclining on couches, while servants presented course after course of delicacies from across the empire: exotic fruits, fish from distant seas, rare spices. The urban poor lived differently. Many crowded into multi-story insulae, apartment blocks often poorly built and prone to fire. Their diet was simpler: bread, olives, porridge, and the occasional portion of meat. Yet even they shared in Rome's vibrant street life, attending festivals, public baths, and games at the Colosseum. For entertainment, Romans flocked to public spectacles. Gladiatorial contests thrilled crowds, though these games were carefully staged, often more performance than deadly combat. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus drew tens of thousands, their cheers echoing across the city as teams competed for glory. But leisure was balanced with civic engagement. The Forum Romanum was not just a marketplace, but the center of public life. Here, citizens gathered to hear orators, discuss politics, and conduct business. It was a place where the ideals of participation and civic discourse came alive, where even the humblest citizen could witness the workings of their republic or empire. Throughout the city, temples honored the gods who shaped Roman thought and daily ritual. Every household maintained a lararium, a shrine to household spirits. Daily offerings, prayers, and rituals kept Romans connected to both their ancestors and the divine, a constant reminder that personal fortune was intertwined with the favor of the gods. Baths were another defining feature of Roman life. These were not mere places to cleanse the body, but social hubs where citizens of all classes mingled, relaxed, exercised, and debated the issues of the day. Warm waters, steam rooms, libraries, and exercise courts offered respite from the bustle of urban life. At the core of Roman society's balance was the belief in mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. These traditions guided behavior, emphasized respect for elders, moderation in all things, and service to the state. The ideal Roman citizen embodied virtues, virtue, pietas, duty, and gravitas, seriousness, qualities that defined both public leaders and private individuals. And while Roman society was hierarchical, it was also mobile. Ambitious men could rise through merit, military valor, and public service, a system called the cursus honorum, the sequential order of political offices that marked a career in public life. But this order was fragile. As Rome grew, disparities widened. The concentration of land and wealth in the hands of the elite displaced many small farmers. The city's population swelled with landless poor, reliant on the grain dole to survive. Tensions between classes simmered, even as the pageantry of festivals and spectacles sought to unify. Still, the idea of Roman citizenship remained a potent force, a unifying identity that transcended region and origin. It bound together soldiers on distant frontiers, merchants in bustling marketplaces, senators debating laws, and artisans crafting pottery. In the countryside, Roman citizens farmed their land, honoring local gods and ancestral spirits, maintaining the rhythms of life that had persisted since the Republic's earliest days. Their lives were rooted in the soil, but connected to the city that ruled the world. As twilight fell over Rome, oil lamps flickered in windows, casting warm light onto cobbled streets. Families gathered for evening meals, recounting stories of ancestors, heroes, and gods. The distant roar of a chariot race or the chants of priests at a temple might drift on the evening breeze, reminders of the city's vibrant, shared life. In these quiet moments, the essence of Roman daily life came into focus. A society bound by tradition and law, by shared rituals and public spaces, by the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Though centuries would pass and Rome itself would change, these rhythms of daily life, the blending of public and private, duty and leisure, tradition and innovation, would endure. And in them, the spirit of Rome would continue to live, echoing down the centuries as a testament to the civilization that once called itself eternal. The culture and great achievements of Rome. As sunlight filters through marble colonnades and glimmers off the tiled roofs of ancient Rome, one begins to understand that the greatness of Rome was never only in its legions or laws, but in its culture, its art, and its profound achievements in architecture, engineering, literature, and philosophy. To walk through the streets of imperial Rome was to walk through a living gallery. Everywhere, artistry met practicality. Mosaic floors depicting myth and legend, painted frescoes adorning villa walls, statues of gods, emperors, and heroes standing watch in public spaces. Roman architecture became one of the civilization's most enduring contributions. While Rome borrowed heavily from the Greeks, columns, temples, symmetry, it innovated boldly. The Romans mastered the arch, the vault, and the dome, enabling them to build on a grander scale than any before them. Perhaps their most magnificent architectural achievement was the Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, whose vast concrete dome remains one of the largest ever built. The oculus at its apex, an open circle to the sky, bathed the temple's interior in shifting light, a reminder of the heavens above. Rome's engineers were equally gifted. The aqueducts that carried fresh water across miles of countryside into the city represented not just technical brilliance, but an understanding of civic welfare. Public baths, fountains, and sewers, like the Cloaca Maxima, kept Rome clean, healthy, and functioning as the world's first true metropolis. Roads, too, symbolized Roman genius. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was not merely poetic, it was literal. The Viae Romanae, paved stone roads that crisscrossed the empire, allowed legions to march swiftly, merchants to trade efficiently, and ideas to flow freely from one corner of the empire to another. But beyond stone and concrete, Rome's cultural achievements flourished in the written word. Literature became a defining mark of Roman civilization. In the epic poetry of Virgil's Aeneid, Romans found a national myth, the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero whose journey led to the founding of Rome. Virgil's verse celebrated Rome's destiny and values, duty, sacrifice, and divine favor. Ovid, with his Metamorphoses, wove together a tapestry of myth and legend, capturing the imagination of generations. His playful yet poignant verses revealed Rome's fascination with transformation, love, and the capriciousness of the gods. Historians like Livy and Tacitus chronicled Rome's past with gravity and insight, their works shaping how Romans understood themselves and how we understand them today. Livy's history of Rome traced the city's journey from humble beginnings to imperial greatness, blending fact and legend into a narrative that gave meaning to Roman identity. Rome's philosophy, though deeply influenced by the Greeks, took on its own character, practical, moral, and focused on the art of living well. Stoicism, in particular, resonated with Roman elites. Its emphasis on self-discipline, duty, and acceptance of fate found expression in figures like Seneca, advisor to Emperor Nero, and Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, whose Meditations remains one of the most cherished works of ancient wisdom. Religion permeated Roman culture at every level. Public festivals, sacrifices, and rituals honored a pantheon of gods, Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Venus, and marked the calendar with celebration and reflection. Temples dotted the city and countryside, each a focal point of community life. Yet Roman religion was inclusive and adaptive. As Rome expanded, it absorbed gods and practices from conquered peoples. The cults of Isis from Egypt, Mithras from Persia, and Cybele from Anatolia found followers in Roman streets and homes, reflecting the empire's diversity. In time, one faith would rise to prominence above all others: Christianity. Once persecuted, Christians endured martyrdom in arenas like the Colosseum, but their message of hope, redemption, and community slowly spread through the empire's vast networks. By the 4th century CE, under Emperor Constantine, Christianity would become the empire's official faith, a transformation as profound as any in Roman history. The arts flourished alongside faith. Roman sculpture evolved from idealized Greek forms to lifelike portraiture, capturing the individuality and character of its subjects. Busts of emperors, senators, and philosophers conveyed not only appearance but power, gravitas, and intellect. Music, theater, and poetry infused daily life. Street performers entertained crowds. Traveling troupes staged comedic plays in open-air theaters. Romans enjoyed performances that ranged from farce to tragedy, celebrating both the lightness and seriousness of life. But culture was not confined to the elite. Ordinary citizens partook in public games, festivals, and rituals. Ludi Romani, the Roman games, blended sport, spectacle, and religious observance, reminding all Romans, from senator to slave, of their shared identity and destiny. Education reflected these values. Boys from wealthy families studied rhetoric, philosophy, and history, preparing for careers in public service. Girls, though largely excluded from formal education, learned the customs and expectations that upheld Roman society. Even as Rome grew vast and cosmopolitan, it retained a reverence for tradition, a belief that its greatness rested on adherence to the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. This reverence infused its culture with continuity, a link between past, present, and future. And so, as night gently descends over marble columns and mosaic floors, one can almost hear the quiet echoes of recited poetry, the murmur of debates in shadowed porticos, the splash of fountains in tranquil courtyards. Rome's cultural achievements were not simply displays of wealth or power. They were expressions of a civilization's spirit, an enduring testament to the values that sustained it: order, duty, beauty, and a deep respect for tradition. Though the empire would one day fall, its culture would endure, woven into the fabric of Western civilization, influencing art, architecture, literature, law, and philosophy for millennia. In this chapter of Rome's story, we find not only the physical splendor of a mighty empire, but the beating heart of a people who understood that greatness lay as much in temples and poems as in legions and laws. Roman expansion and the Punic Wars. As Rome matured from a regional power into a republic with growing ambition, its gaze naturally turned outward, toward new lands, new opportunities, and new challenges. By the 3rd century BCE, the city-state that had once been a humble collection of huts on the Palatine Hill was ready to contend for dominance of the entire Mediterranean world. But Rome would not rise unchallenged. Across the sea to the southwest lay Carthage, a wealthy, seafaring city-state founded centuries earlier by Phoenician traders. Where Rome was a land power rooted in agriculture and infantry, Carthage was a maritime power, its influence stretching across North Africa, Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily. Inevitably, these two great republics collided. This collision would come to be known as the Punic Wars, a series of 3 devastating conflicts fought over more than a century, shaping the destiny not just of Rome and Carthage, but of the Mediterranean itself. The First Punic War, 264-241 BCE, erupted over control of Sicily, a wealthy island at the crossroads of Mediterranean trade. Rome, initially inexperienced at sea, quickly adapted, building fleets and inventing the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed their infantry to fight naval battles as if on land. Through determination and relentless effort, Rome wore Carthage down, emerging victorious and claiming Sicily as its first overseas province. But it was the Second Punic War, 218-201 BCE, that would become legendary, a conflict defined by daring strategy, epic marches, and bitter struggle. It was during this war that Rome faced its greatest adversary, Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian general of extraordinary brilliance. Hannibal's march remains one of the most astonishing feats in military history. Defying expectations, he led his army, including elephants, over the Alps, enduring snow, ice, and ambushes, to descend upon the plains of Italy. His arrival stunned Rome and set the stage for a series of crushing defeats. At Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal inflicted one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Surrounded and outmaneuvered, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers perished in a single day, a trauma that seared itself into Rome's collective memory. But Rome did not collapse. The Republic's resilience, its refusal to surrender even in the face of disaster, defined this period. Led by generals like Fabius Maximus, who adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding pitched battles, and harassing Hannibal's supply lines, Rome slowly regained its footing. In time, a young general named Publius Cornelius Scipio took the fight to Carthage's doorstep. In 202 BCE, at Zama in North Africa, Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal, ending the war on Roman terms. Carthage was forced to surrender its navy, pay heavy tribute, and cede its empire. The Third Punic War, 149-146 BCE, coming decades later, was brief but brutal. Suspicious and fearful of Carthage's recovery, Rome demanded impossible terms. When Carthage resisted, Rome laid siege. After 3 years of bitter fighting, the city was stormed, its walls torn down, its people enslaved, and, according to legend, its fields sown with salt so that nothing would grow again. The destruction of Carthage marked a turning point. Rome was now unchallenged in the western Mediterranean. The islands of Sardinia and Corsica, the Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain, and eventually North Africa itself became Roman provinces, bringing wealth, land, and opportunity, but also sowing the seeds of future challenges. With victory came expansion on an unprecedented scale. Rome's armies marched eastward, defeating the once mighty kingdoms of Macedonia and Greece, absorbing their lands and cultures into the growing empire. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome ruled from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the shores of Asia Minor. But expansion came at a cost. The wealth of empire flowed into Rome, enriching its elite, but widening the gap between rich and poor. Vast estates, worked by slave labor, displaced small farmers, leading to unrest and social upheaval. The very victories that made Rome great also strained the republican system that had nurtured that greatness. Even so, Roman expansion transformed the Mediterranean into what would later be called the Mare Nostrum, our sea. Roman law, language, and culture spread, forging a vast and interconnected world. Throughout these wars and conquests, Rome's resilience shone brightly. Again and again, the Republic faced superior foes, devastating defeats, and internal strife. Yet again and again, it recovered, adapted, and ultimately triumphed. We can imagine the legions returning to the Eternal City, standards held high, marching in triumphal processions through streets lined with cheering citizens. Spoils of war filled temples and treasuries. Prisoners marched in chains, and Rome's glory seemed boundless. But the Punic Wars did more than expand Rome's territory. They forged a Roman identity rooted in endurance, pragmatism, and military excellence. The wars taught Rome that victory required sacrifice and discipline, and they instilled a worldview that saw Rome not simply as a city, but as the rightful ruler of the known world. As evening falls on the quiet streets of Rome, one can almost hear the distant echoes of legionary songs, the creak of wagons laden with booty, and the solemn footsteps of generals who carried the fate of the Republic on their shoulders. This chapter in Rome's story was one of conquest and glory, but also of transformation. The Republic that emerged from the Punic Wars was stronger and richer, but also more complex and divided, setting the stage for future conflicts that would ultimately reshape Rome itself. From civil war to empire, Julius Caesar and Augustus. As Rome's dominion expanded and wealth poured into the Eternal City, beneath its marble temples and triumphal arches, the foundations of the Republic began to crack. The very success that had made Rome master of the Mediterranean now threatened its delicate balance of power. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically. Elite senators amassed vast estates, worked by an ever-growing population of slaves captured in war, while small farmers, the backbone of Rome, were pushed from their lands and crowded into the slums of the city. Political life became turbulent, marked by corruption, populist rhetoric, and violence in the streets. The Senate, once the guardian of Rome's traditions, struggled to govern an empire far larger and more complex than the city-state it had once served. The assemblies of citizens were increasingly manipulated by ambitious politicians promising bread and games. It was against this backdrop of social upheaval and political paralysis that one of history's most extraordinary figures rose to prominence, Gaius Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BCE to a patrician family of ancient lineage but modest wealth, Caesar was charismatic, ambitious, and supremely skilled in both politics and war. He understood that Rome's future lay not simply in tradition, but in adaptation. His early career blended political savvy with military achievement. He served as consul, Rome's highest elected office, and then took command in Gaul, where he waged a brilliant and brutal campaign that expanded Rome's borders to the English Channel and the Rhine River. The Gallic Wars made Caesar immensely wealthy and beloved by his troops, who saw in him a leader who shared their hardships and led from the front. His legions became fiercely loyal, not just to the Republic, but to Caesar himself. But this loyalty alarmed Rome's traditional elites. Many senators feared Caesar's growing power and influence. When the Senate, under the leadership of Pompey Magnus, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, he faced a choice: obey and fade into obscurity, or defy the Senate and claim his destiny. On a cold January day in 49 BCE, Caesar made his decision. With a single legion, he crossed the Rubicon River, the traditional boundary between his province and Italy itself. As he did, he uttered the fateful words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. With that act, Rome plunged into civil war. The war was swift and decisive. Caesar, a masterful strategist, defeated Pompey's forces in a series of battles across Italy, Greece, and Egypt. Pompey himself fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated upon arrival. Caesar followed and became entangled in the politics of the Ptolemaic court, famously aligning himself with Queen Cleopatra. Returning to Rome victorious, Caesar was appointed dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. But while he claimed to preserve republican forms, his actions undermined them. He bypassed traditional institutions, filled the Senate with his supporters, and centralized power in his own hands. For many Romans, Caesar's reforms, redistributing land, relieving debt, expanding citizenship, were welcome. But for the senatorial elite, they signaled the death of the Republic. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, as Caesar entered the Senate House, he was assassinated by a group of senators who styled themselves liberators. Among them was Brutus, a man Caesar once considered a friend. Their hope was that by killing Caesar, they could restore the Republic. But instead, they unleashed further chaos. In the power vacuum that followed, Caesar's adopted heir, Gaius Octavius, known to history as Augustus, emerged as the dominant figure. Though only 18 at the time of Caesar's death, Augustus proved politically astute, patient, and ruthless when needed. He formed an uneasy alliance with Mark Antony and Lepidus, the second triumvirate, dedicated to avenging Caesar's murder and defeating his assassins. Their forces triumphed at the Battle of Philippi, where Brutus and Cassius met their end. But the alliance soon dissolved into rivalry. Mark Antony allied himself with Cleopatra, raising the specter of an Eastern despotism ruling over Rome. Augustus, ever the careful tactician, used this fear to rally Rome to his cause. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Augustus's fleet decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra's forces. The lovers fled to Egypt, where, in the shadow of impending defeat, they took their own lives. With their deaths, Augustus stood alone. In 27 BCE, he formally offered to resign his powers to the Senate. But this was theater. The Senate, grateful for peace and stability after years of war, bestowed upon him extraordinary authority. Augustus wisely avoided the title Rex, king, a word forever tainted by the memory of Tarquin the Proud. Instead, he took the title Princeps, first citizen. He presented himself as a restorer of the Republic, even as he accumulated powers that effectively made him Rome's first emperor. His reign inaugurated a new era, the Principate, a delicate balance between imperial authority and republican tradition. Augustus reformed the army, the tax system, and the administration of provinces. He patronized the arts, restored temples, and cultivated a public image of dignity, moderation, and piety. Under Augustus, Rome achieved both peace and prosperity, a period later known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace. And yet, this peace came at the cost of liberty. The Republic, while nominally preserved, was now hollow. The Senate still met, elections still occurred, laws were still passed, but real power resided in one man. As twilight envelops the eternal city, we can reflect on this profound transformation. Rome, once governed by a complex system of checks and balances, had become an empire in all but name. In Augustus's careful hands, this empire would thrive. But beneath the surface, the questions raised by Caesar's rise and fall remained. Could any one person wield such power wisely? And could Rome preserve its spirit of shared governance in an age of emperors? This chapter closes with the image of Augustus himself, standing atop the Palatine Hill, looking out over a city reborn, a city whose destiny he had shaped, but whose future remained uncertain. Pax Romana, the height of Roman prosperity. In the peaceful hours of early morning, as the golden sun rises over the marble domes and bustling markets of Rome, a sense of stability and grandeur fills the air. This was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period that stretched for over 2 centuries. beginning with Augustus and marking the height of Rome's power, prosperity, and influence. The Pax Romana was not merely the absence of war, but a time when Rome's political structures, economy, culture, and society flourished in harmony. Under Augustus and his successors, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the windswept moors of Britain to the deserts of Arabia, from the Atlantic shores of Hispania to the lush valleys of the Nile. At the heart of this vast empire stood the city of Rome itself, a bustling metropolis home to more than 1 million souls, the largest city the world had yet known. Its skyline was defined by soaring temples, grand forums, sprawling bath complexes, and monumental amphitheaters. The Colosseum, completed under Emperor Vespasian and inaugurated by his son Titus, symbolized Rome's grandeur. Seating over 50,000 spectators, it was a marvel of engineering, where citizens gathered to watch gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, and elaborate spectacles. The Forum Romanum, the civic heart of the city, bustled with merchants, politicians, and philosophers. Statues of emperors, generals, and deities adorned public spaces, reminding citizens of Rome's history and glory. But beyond Rome's borders, life also flourished. The empire was connected by a network of meticulously constructed roads, allowing legions, merchants, and messengers to traverse thousands of miles with unprecedented speed and safety. Roman engineers built bridges, aqueducts, and ports that transformed distant provinces into integral parts of a unified empire. The Mediterranean Sea, which Rome now called Mare Nostrum, our sea, became a thoroughfare of commerce and culture. Grain from Egypt fed the city's vast population. Olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, and spices from the East flowed into Roman markets. Roman law, language, and culture spread along these routes, binding diverse peoples into a shared imperial identity. In cities from Londinium in distant Britain to Antioch in the east, Roman theaters, baths, forums, and temples rose, symbolizing the empire's reach. The emperors of this era, known as the Five Good Emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, governed wisely and justly. Under them, Rome enjoyed competent administration, relative political stability, and legal reforms that strengthened the empire's cohesion. Emperor Trajan extended Rome's frontiers to their furthest extent, conquering Dacia, modern-day Romania, and bringing immense wealth into the imperial treasury. His monumental column in Rome still stands, depicting in intricate relief the story of his campaigns. His successor, Hadrian, recognized the limits of expansion and chose instead to consolidate. He built Hadrian's Wall across northern Britain, a symbol that defined the edges of Roman civilization, and traveled the empire extensively, overseeing its defenses and encouraging the flourishing of cities. Daily life during the Pax Romana was marked by remarkable uniformity. In towns and cities across the empire, citizens attended public baths, worshipped at local temples, enjoyed festivals and spectacles, and lived according to the rhythms of Roman law and custom. For many, citizenship itself had become more accessible. In earlier centuries, citizenship was restricted mainly to those born in Rome or Italy, but by the end of the Pax Romana, it had expanded significantly, helping to integrate diverse peoples into the Roman world. Roman culture also reached an artistic and intellectual peak during this era. Architecture, sculpture, literature, and philosophy flourished, leaving legacies that would endure for millennia. Roman poets, historians, and philosophers wrote works that continued to inspire generations long after the empire's political power waned. Yet, beneath this outward splendor lay challenges. Economic inequality persisted, and wealth was concentrated in the hands of the elite. Slavery remained widespread, underpinning much of the economy and infrastructure. The empire's sheer size made communication and control increasingly difficult. In distant provinces, tribal groups tested the empire's borders, and occasional uprisings flared. The emperors maintained order through careful diplomacy, military presence, and infrastructure that allowed rapid response to trouble. Amid this vast, complex, and diverse empire, the ideal of Romanitas, the Roman way of life, provided a unifying identity. It was a blend of law, civic duty, language, customs, and respect for tradition that bound together peoples from vastly different cultures. As night fell over the empire, oil lamps illuminated villas and taverns, forums and homes. From Londinium to Alexandria, from Cordoba to Jerusalem, Romans, whether citizens by birth or by decree, shared a world shaped by the empire's peace and prosperity. In these quiet hours, we can reflect on what made the Pax Romana extraordinary. Not merely its absence of conflict, but its ability to create a cohesive, vibrant civilization stretching across continents and cultures. Rome at its height was not simply a city or even a state. It was an idea, a way of organizing human life through law, infrastructure, and shared identity. And though this peace would not last forever, it left an indelible imprint on the lands and peoples it touched. As the stars rise over Rome, we hear the soft echoes of bustling markets, heated debates in marble forums, and the footsteps of citizens walking carefully paved roads, reminders of a time when the world, however briefly, seemed to be held together by Roman order. Decline and enduring legacy of Rome. As the long shadows of evening stretched across the ancient streets of Rome, the empire that had once dominated the known world found itself standing at a crossroads, a place between glory and decline, between endurance and inevitable change. By the late 2nd century CE, after the death of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, signs of strain began to emerge. The Pax Romana, the long peace that had nurtured prosperity and stability, gave way to turbulence. His successor, Commodus, proved an erratic and self-indulgent ruler, ushering in an age of political instability. In the decades that followed, Rome faced a period known to history as the crisis of the 3rd century. Invasions by barbarian tribes, outbreaks of plague, economic turmoil, and civil wars ravaged the empire. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, some reigning for mere months before being overthrown or assassinated. At times, multiple claimants to the imperial throne fought bitterly, fracturing the empire's unity. Rome's borders, once secure and carefully patrolled, were increasingly tested by external threats. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers, Germanic tribes pushed against the frontier, seeking entry into the empire's lands. In the east, a resurgent Persian empire challenged Roman authority. Amidst these pressures, the economy faltered. Inflation soared, trade slowed, and heavy taxation burdened provinces already weakened by war and disease. The population of Rome itself declined, and cracks appeared in the grand structures that had symbolized imperial strength. Yet Rome's resilience remained remarkable. Emperors such as Diocletian sought to reform and stabilize the empire. Diocletian recognized that Rome had become too vast for one man to govern effectively, and in 285 CE, he divided the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by its own emperor. This administrative division, though intended as a temporary solution, became permanent. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Byzantium, later Constantinople, would endure for another 1,000 years. The Western Roman Empire, centered in Rome and later Ravenna, struggled to maintain itself against mounting challenges. The 4th century witnessed another profound transformation: the rise of Christianity as a dominant force within Roman society. Once persecuted, Christians gradually gained acceptance, culminating in Emperor Constantine's conversion and the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which granted religious tolerance. Constantine also founded a New Rome on the site of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. This city would become the capital of the Eastern Empire and a bastion of Roman culture and tradition long after the fall of the West. But in the West, decline continued. In 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric, a shock that reverberated throughout the empire and symbolized its vulnerability. By the mid-5th century, waves of migration and invasion overwhelmed the Western Empire. The Vandals, crossing from North Africa, sacked Rome again in 455 CE. Internal decay accelerated as weak emperors, often mere puppets of military leaders, struggled to maintain order. In 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire came to an end. The Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, and declared himself ruler of Italy. The Senate, that ancient body, which had once guided the Republic, faded into obscurity. The fall of Rome became a powerful symbol in history. Not just the collapse of a city or a state, but the passing of an era. Yet Rome's legacy did not vanish with the Western Empire's political demise. Its laws, language, architecture, and ideals endured. The Eastern Roman Empire, known to later generations as the Byzantine Empire, would preserve and transmit much of Roman culture for centuries. Roman law became the foundation of many legal systems in Europe and beyond. The Latin language evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, spoken by millions today. Roman engineering achievements, roads, aqueducts, bridges, remained standing, many still used long after the empire's fall. Roman art and architecture inspired countless generations of builders, sculptors, and painters. The very idea of Rome, the urbs aeterna, the eternal city, survived in imagination and aspiration. Kings, emperors, popes, and conquerors looked to Rome as a model of power, order, and civilization. Even centuries later, when the Holy Roman Empire was proclaimed in medieval Europe, it took its name from Rome, claiming continuity with its glories and traditions. As we reflect on Rome's decline, it is clear that while political power may fade, cultural influence can endure for millennia. And so, as night falls gently over the ruins of the Forum and the arches of the Colosseum, we can still sense the spirit of Rome in the stones that remain. The echo of senators' debates, the footsteps of legionaries, the prayers of citizens at their household shrines. Rome's history was not simply a story of rise and fall. It was a story of transformation, of adaptation, and of profound influence. Though the empire came to an end in the West, the civilization it nurtured lives on in law, language, art, architecture, and in the very idea of community and citizenship. Reflections on Eternal Rome. As our journey through the story of Rome draws gently to a close, let us pause for a quiet moment. Beyond the wars and emperors, beyond the marble monuments and bustling forums, to reflect softly on the deeper legacy this civilization left behind. Imagine yourself standing among the ruins of the Forum Romanum as twilight deepens into night. The stones are worn and silent now, but once they echoed with voices debating law, justice, and destiny. The arches and columns rise like silhouettes against the starry sky, reminders that even as empires fade, some things endure. Rome's story is not simply a chronicle of power. It is a meditation on human ambition, resilience, and continuity. For centuries, Romans built, fought, debated, dreamed. Their roads connected peoples, their laws sought justice, their language gave poetry and philosophy a voice. Their architecture reached toward the heavens. Their rituals wove together earth and sky, the living and the dead, the individual and the state. And though the empire itself would pass, these gifts did not vanish. Roman ideas shaped nations that followed. Their vision of citizenship still influences how we think about community and belonging. The grandeur of their monuments still humbles us. The cadence of their language still resonates in words we speak today. So, as you let this story settle gently in your thoughts, know that the journey through Rome is never truly over. The echoes of its past continue, soft but persistent, in the world around us, in the curve of an arch, in the fairness of a law, in the shared pride of citizenship, in the simple idea that civilization can aspire to something lasting. Breathe deeply now. Let the long arc of Rome's history soothe you, not as a tale of distant times, but as a quiet reminder that we, too, build on foundations laid by those who came before. The stones of Rome stand still beneath moonlight, patient and enduring, whispering to us across the centuries. As you drift gently towards sleep, may this ancient story cradle your thoughts, offering peace in the knowledge that even as ages turn, some legacies remain eternal. Good night, traveler. The eternal city keeps watch.